Such critics don't speak to the breadth and depth of my experience. Furthermore, secular feminist frameworks are not useful in understanding how women in traditional religions view their own liberation and spiritual gendered equality. Although there may be some individuals who, quote, in the name of religion abuse power, that certainly does not mean that the religion itself or its members generally are sexist, or for that matter, that any thinking woman would recoil from Mormonism. And then Preston asks, am I less of a feminist because I am deeply religious and devoted to this traditional, conservative, organized religion? And of course the answer is no. In response to increasingly tense debates over women in religion, Preston has suggested how American and secular feminists, as outsiders to religions, countries, and cultures, might help women in their struggle for empowerment and respect without arrogance or insensitivity. Further, Preston warns secular feminists to avoid the, quote, age-old traps of arrogance, racism, imperialism, and maternalism. Or in other words, speaking down to us and telling us that we're too oppressed to be able to save ourselves. Again, women seek ways of negotiating within their established institutions and not feeling forced to reject their religion because, quote, if the feminist message is posited in a strict polarity between feminism and traditional religion, making women think that they have to choose between the two, then many of the world's women will choose their religion. Here, Preston invites a useful comparison to Muslim women. Quoting from Muslim feminist Aziza al-Hibri, the majority of Muslim women who are attached to their religion will not be liberated through the use of a secular approach imposed from the outside. Feminist Fareed Shahid also advised against making Muslim women reject the foundation of their faith. She says, a woman's movement needs to be perceived as rooted in the cultural reality of the society in which it operates. Discriminatory laws sanctified through Islam cannot be effectively countered with arguments which deny or discard Islam. In other words, don't make us reject our faith in the name of trying to liberate us from so-called female oppression. Rejection of a woman's religious foundational framework will only create alienation and divisiveness. A woman who is a practicing member of a religious institution is inevitably going to be hesitant to accept advice from someone who does not understand her value system and her commitment to it. This paper is an admittedly apologist response to the question of Mormon women's so-called oppression, but it is by no means a simplistic response to those who have honestly struggled with real and perceived gender inequity in their church experiences, especially regarding patriarchy and priesthood, polygamy, ambiguities about Mormon female authority, and dictates about women's traditional domestic roles. Many faithful women might feel sympathy with Hudson as an active Mormon woman, a mother, and a professor at BYU who experienced her own gender struggle in 1992 and 93 when, quote, for almost a year and a half she walked around as if the skin of her body had been rubbed raw by sandpaper. Things she never noticed before, even little things, caused her agony of soul, unquote. I feel sorrow for the lament of some Mormon feminists, some who I know very well, who are disaffected and or excommunicated, who have determined that, quote, the fight for women's equality in the Mormon Church is over. Our efforts to change the institution, this is a quote, our efforts to change the institution have been almost fruitless. We haven't changed a thing. In fact, women's official status in the church is worse now than in the 60s and early 70s. We have no hope left. And that's from Vicki Stewart Eastman. While I do not share this attitude of response, I acknowledge the pain they have experienced in trying to reconcile the inequity, both real and perceived. I also celebrate with the multitudes of Mormon women who have found reason to rejoice in their status of women of spirituality, familial strength, purity, and leadership in the church, in education, and in the world. We rejoice in personal revelation in the words of our female leaders like Ardith Kapp, Sherry Dew, Chieko Okazaki, Marie Hafen, Patricia Holland, Elaine Jack, and others who have reminded us of the immense power we possess as women of spiritual strength in a world of intense conflict and moral decay. We are also reminded by Jill Mulvey-Durr of the empowering and historical sisterhood of the Relief Society. And further, in few other religions can women find such a celebration of motherhood as they do in this church. Recent interest in the place of Mormon women is evidenced by the prolific numbers of publications that address Mormon women's history, the story of the Relief Society, biographies of significant Mormon female figures, sister missionary work, polygamy, the nature of Eve, women's spiritual questions, sociological studies, and issues of importance to Mormon women like work, family, and education. And believe me, the publications are extremely prolific. To try and sort through everything that's been written about Mormon women in the last 20 years is like taking a graduate seminar twice, literally. Perhaps the best example of how women within the church have provided very differing interpretations of their own place within that church is the editorial battle that occurred in the Boston Globe in the fall of 2000. Supported by the signatures of 50 women, feminists Courtney Black and Maxine Hanks responded to President Gordon B. Hinckley's statement that, quote, "I haven't found any complaint among our women. I'm sure there are a handful somewhere who may be disaffected for one reason or another, but I've never seen any evidence of it," unquote. Black and Hanks answered, "With all due respect to our remarkable 90-year-old church leader, we find his words unfathomable in the face of reality. Thus we write to correct a misconception repeatedly set forth by LDS Church leaders in the media. Mormon women are not content, we do have complaints." Shortly following this editorial, Mormon feminist Elizabeth Dion offered a rebuttal to Hanks and Black that, quote, "When one considers that the worldwide membership of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints exceeds 11 million, 50 signatures from around the world is an underwhelming show of support," unquote. Further, Dion expressed that she would be, quote, "shocked if more than 1 in 50 Mormon women would be sympathetic to the views or methods of Hanks and Black," unquote. Instead, Dion has seen the institutional church as an inherently feminist organization that, especially for women in the international church, means, quote, "teaching men to stop drinking, to become industrious, and to treat their wives and children with love and respect," unquote. Further, the church provides liberation to teenage girls by, quote, "creating a supportive community that shields them from sexual predation until they have the maturity to make self-realizing decisions," unquote. In the face of such extreme divergence among feminist response, how does one attempt to answer outside critics' charges regarding Mormon women's so-called oppression? The answer should not divide women into the two camps of faithful women and, quote, "those apostate feminists." Instead, I much prefer to approach this as a dialogue among women, each with individual methods of negotiation, acceptance or rejection, spiritual definition, and of course feminism. As Dion herself noted in her editorial, feminism is in the eye of the beholder. No one has the right to dictate the form feminism will take for any individual organization, so long as women individually or within that organization feel that such feminism meets their needs and fosters their growth as women, unquote. And while some women have chosen to leave the church entirely, others have chosen acceptance and celebration of their roles as women, as defined by the church, and by leaning on faithful negotiation rather than rebellious discontent. Not only will this study respond to misperceptions about Mormon women from without the church, it might also help what Valerie Hudson calls the multitudes of, quote, "good faithful Latter-day Saint women who have at some point felt a certain amount of pain because they are not always able to articulate a coherent vision of how they stand as equals with men in the church and in the eternities," unquote. Thus the basic question boils down to, are Mormon women oppressed by the doctrines and institutional structure of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? And how can intelligent and educated women reconcile participation in a male-led religion? Mormon scholars have addressed these questions from a multiplicity of directions, including priesthood leadership, temple worship, polygamy, missionary work, questions about Heavenly Mother and the nature of Eve, family planning and birth control, divisions caused by the ERA debate, and the purpose for higher education for women in the church. While I cannot possibly deal with all these areas, I'm offering my few basic categories of consideration and response: the Prozac, polygamy, priesthood, alliteration. So I'll first deal with Prozac. A widely publicized 1994 study claimed that Utah had the highest per capita female use of Prozac in the nation. Although the study itself was admittedly problematic, critics of the church are quick to cite the study's sensationalized conclusions as proof that Mormon women must suffer under the strains of patriarchy, early marriages, constant childbearing, and voiceless acceptance of male dominance. What this study failed to show are the complex factors that might affect the use of Prozac and other antidepressants. These include socioeconomic status, level of education, number of children, genetic factors determining predisposition to depression, religiosity or non-religiosity, even among Mormon women born into the faith who are non-practicing, if we're going to talk about the Utah demographic, counseling service that accompany medication, and the numbers of men who might also require medication and counseling.